Hello everyone, this is David Everson, Dr. Everson, bringing you some information on angels. I thought what might be useful to do a little comparison between biblical angels and ancient Near Eastern messenger deities. They have very similar functions comparatively. So in the Bible, angels deliver messages on behalf of gods, and in ancient Mesopotamia and in ancient Egypt, they believed there were gods that would carry messages for other gods. And so it might be useful to simply refer to both of these groups as heavenly messengers, just so we can sort of put them on the same level for a moment. Hey, there's a messenger god right there, chiseled out of stone. If he could speak, what would he tell you? He might say, hey, heavenly messengers in the Old Testament versus the ancient Near East, they're different. For example, in the ancient Near East, heavenly messengers are believed to be gods. They are treated as gods. Whereas in the Old Testament, they're never referred to as gods. They're always simply called messengers, or malachim. Malach in Hebrew means messenger. So the biblical prophet Malachi, his name means my messenger, Malachi. Or if he was from Italy, you might call him, hey, Malachi. Sorry. Okay. So, and how do we know ancient Near Eastern heavenly messengers are treated as gods? Because they're called gods. They're referred to as gods, right? They're given that title, whereas in the Old Testament, that's not true. They're spiritual beings, they're heavenly beings, but they're not referred to as gods or treated as gods. One way that they're similar is that they both look human. So ancient Near Eastern messenger gods are described as looking very much like humans, right? So that statue there on the screen, right, looks like a regular guy wearing his skirt. Of course, prior to the Persians, every good man wore a skirt. Pants came later. So anyway, they look like human beings. And in the Old Testament, angels are described looking like humans. And one example that comes to mind for me would be when the heavenly messengers are sent to get Lot out of the city. They come to his house, the Malachim, and the men from the town who have nefarious purposes knock on his door and they say, hey, where are those men? Where are those Anashim? The men in town think that the heavenly messengers are men. And when the messengers come to Abraham, it's not clear that Abraham understands that they're heavenly messengers. Or in the New Testament, this is going beyond the Old Testament here, but in the New Testament, Paul says that people might be entertaining angels unaware. So there is this idea that, or for example, when Peter is miraculously freed from the jail and he comes to the door, the other disciples say, oh, that's probably just his angel, it's not him, he's in jail. And so there's this idea that people had a guardian angel that looked just like them. This is an idea within Judaism. And so there's this long tradition of angels looking like humans. Right? I think we often think of sort of the classical idea of angels is they have wings, or they might be terrifying, or they might be cute little babies on Hallmark cards. But in the Old Testament, they're often described in terms where they look like people. And this is similar to how ancient Near Eastern messenger deities are treated as well. Who receives the messengers? This is a very important difference. I think it says something about the God of the Israelites. Gods weren't particularly interested in speaking to humans in ancient Babylon and in ancient Egypt, right? The ancient Near Eastern messenger deities, those heavenly messengers, were sent from one god to another, or those folks believed they were sent from one god to another. But in the Old Testament, heavenly angels, heavenly messengers are sent to speak to humans regularly, right? There's quite a number of passages where angels speak directly to humans, right? And that's distinct from the ancient Near East. And so we see this picture of the God of the Old Testament being personally, intimately involved with the lives of his people. All right. Oh, sorry. Move on here. How about the function? What do angels do in the Old Testament? There we have a wood carving of Jacob's ladder. And of course, there they have wings. And I would challenge you to find an Old Testament passage that describes an angel with wings. They're never described with wings. There's a passage in Daniel where it describes a flight, a quick flight. I believe it's in Daniel 9. But anyway, in this picture, if you got the wings, why are you on the ladder? You know. So anyway, Jacob might have asked him that when he was lying there. Okay, revelation. They reveal things to humanity from God. They communicate human words. Communicate to humans words from God. That's one of their main functions, the function of revelation. So Zechariah, there's an interpreting angel in Zechariah. Within Judaism, there was later this idea that the law was given to Moses from angels, that they're an intermediary between infinite God and finite creation, would be a spiritual being. And so that's how they're described in the Old Testament. Theophonic assistance, which is kind of a fancy phrase, but it's this idea that God is a king or God is a judge. And what do kings and judges have? They have a court. And so just as the king is surrounded by his court, or a judge is surrounded by his court, or when a king goes to war, he has a host. He has an army that precedes him and that marches with him. He has an entourage. There's this sort of royal party that travels with God. Angels are regularly described this way in the Old Testament, right? Which sort of lends to the awe and splendor of God, thinking of him in these terms as having this mighty army, or this host, this glorious group that precedes him. Moving on here, and they interact with humans, for better or for worse, right? Sometimes they're sent to assist humans, right? Like in Daniel, or that of course they assist Moses. I guess that would be the first one, Revelation. Sometimes they're sent to bring destruction, right? There's the Malach HaMavet, the angel of death. There's the destruction that comes to Sodom and Gomorrah. They reveal things from God. They precede God in his appearances, and they interact with humans for better or worse. Let me just add a couple of points here that aren't on the screen. Named angels aren't real common in the Old Testament or in the New. There are quite a lot of angelic names out there if you just start searching around, and I can point you to where those come from in the ancient world. But you have Gabriel and Michael as angels that are mentioned in the book of Daniel. In the Apocrypha, the angel Raphael is named, but that's not in our Protestant Old Testament. And that's it. Those are the angelic names that we have. Also, they're not, as I said before, they're not portrayed with wings. A couple of things that aren't mentioned on the slide that could have been would be the idea of seraphim and cherubim. Famously, Isaiah, when he enters into the temple, or he has a vision of the temple in Isaiah chapter 6, and he sees the temple shaking, and he sees the seraphim. And they have 6 wings, and with 2 they fly, and with 2 they cover their face, and with 2 they cover their feet, or they cover their private parts, some people would say. And what are the seraphim? Saraph in Hebrew means to burn, so they're fiery beings. Some people think they might have been sort of serpentine or snake-like flying creatures, like these fantastic creatures. And I haven't included them here because they're not referred to as angels. Some people see the seraphim as angels, but I'm not sure why people call them angels, and that the Bible doesn't call them angels. They're called seraphim. Or the cherubim, the cheruvim, famously in Ezekiel, the prophet Ezekiel has this vision of God's heavenly chariot, the Merkava, which leads to a whole long history of Jewish mystical literature dealing with the God's chariot, Merkava mysticism. Anyway, these creatures are described as having multiple faces and wings and many eyes. And the chariot is described as having wheels within wheels, and it's upon all of this that God is able to move here and there with ease throughout the world. And it's this frightening, impressive creature, this terrifying creature that God rides upon, the cherubim. Of course, the cherubim are also depicted as these creatures are on top of the Ark of the Covenant, and they function as a sort of throne for God in the temple or in the tabernacle. And I haven't included them in this slide either, in that they're not referred to as angels. They're simply called the cheruvim. So anyway, that's just a real brief snapshot summary of what the Old Testament has to say about angels. All right, hope you're all doing well. Oh, yeah, wings. They're not described as having wings. All right, have a good one.